Just a couple of lines, Dr. Stevens, to those who don't know you. Who are you and what do you do?
I'm John Stevens. I know a great many people here in the room, but my day job is I'm Deputy Director of Teaching Schools and School Improvement in the National College for Teaching and Leadership, which is part of the Department for Education.
And Professor, a couple of lines about you and where you work and what you do.
I'm Sam Twiselton, currently Director of Sheffield Institute of Education at Sheffield Hallam University. I was at University of Cumbria before that, so it's nice to be sort of back home. I was also on the expert advisory panel for the Carter Review of Initial Teacher Training this time last year. And I'm now on the behaviour expert group in ITT, which is one of the kind of spin-offs from that. So I'm going to shamelessly be plugging that in my response to answers today.
If you attempt to shoehorn in as much as you like,
Yeah.
mine will be to make sure we stay on track. Before we get to the questions then, you get 60 seconds and I will be strict because our time has been eaten into a bit. The main opportunities and main challenges of the school-led system. 60 seconds. John.
I think some of those have already been highlighted by things that other people have said, but for me, it is very much about the capacity to make sure that we get that educational excellence everywhere. All the things that Dave was just talking about here in the Northwest, it's fantastic. It's not, however, replicated in every single part of the country. And in some parts of the country that most need that, are some of the areas that perhaps we need to do a lot more work to get to a greater sense of school-led system.
37 seconds, well done. Frank, you can have your full 60 if you need it.
I mean, John has said some of the most important bits, but it's about getting the quality of the leadership right is one of the absolute essentials, and the amount of it, which includes getting the training and preparation, because as we develop the system, executive leadership and chief executive leadership are different things from head teachering, and I think the structure of the system, the governance, is the other area. If we get those two right, I think an awful lot more follows.
Professor, what are the opportunities and the challenges in your view?
I think I've had the privilege of seeing the system at its best through some of the Carter stuff that I've been involved in. At its best, you see great schools with great leaders and great workforce coming together just as they are doing today, sort of taking the initiative and leading themselves. At its worst, it can be fragmented, it can be dispersed, it can be pitting people against each other. And I think that's one of the things that I'm concerned about, a little bit too much competition and too much conflict. Today is an example of how it should work, with people really bringing together the best practice, but that's not at the moment universal across the piece.
Fragmented and dispersed, interesting. Chancellor, the challenges and the opportunities?
University of Manchester has more staff on Board of Governors in the northwest of England than any other university in the country. I hope that continues. This is the busiest week of my life with Desert Island Discs and with the Chancellorship and the speech that I had to write for it, which was about migrants in particular. And so I've got to apologise for my initial keynote speech. I've given some incredible ones this week. This wasn't one of them. So if you're not inspired by it, I really do apologise. And I'll give half of my fee back to the people who are paying me to be here, just so you know that's who I am and where I am. But to get more university staff onto more schools, Board of Governors is something that will continue.
Okay, well, if you were off form this morning, I'd love to see when you're on form, because you're
I'm good. I am good.
You must be on bloody fire when you're on form, Chancellor, I have to tell you.
Like a school, you know, it's good to know when you're good and it's good to know when you're bad. It's good to address it, draw a line under it.
When your work requires improvement.
Name it. Thank you. Name it. Put it above the crease and move on.
Well,
yeah.
you wouldn't grade yourself as outstanding when you would this morning. Right, keypads, troops, we'll do some questions and then we'll talk to the panel. If we have time at the end, I will go to the floor and we'll get a mic round. Question 1 then, please. You get 20 seconds when you see it on the screen. There you are. The Royal College of Teaching, should it come to pass, will develop professionalism in the profession. Do you believe that? A, strongly, B, partially, C, neither, or agree or disagree. You don't agree or you strongly disagree. The Royal College of Teaching will develop professionalism in the profession. You've got 2 seconds left, and your answers are as follows. Partly. People sitting on the fence. Only strongly disagree, 1%, 8%, 15 strongly agree that a Royal College of Teaching will be a good thing. Well, let's ask the panel, because you can be a member of the Royal College of Physicians, a member of the Royal College of Nursing, a member of the Royal College of Midwifery. Would it enhance my wife's professionalism, John, do you think, to be a MRCT at the end of her name?
I think one of the things I would say is that in part that question is predicated on the suggestion that the profession doesn't already identify as a profession, and I would challenge that. You only have to look around the room today and hear of the great examples of things that people are doing to recognise there is already a great sense of the profession. However, what I do think sometimes happens is there isn't a coherent voice, there isn't a coherent funnel, if I can use that technical term, through which professionalism of teaching can be expressed. And for me, a college with the Royal Charter, a Royal College of Teaching, that begins to bring a degree of coherence around that professionalism, I think could really begin to sharpen it, not least for the public, as well as for the profession itself, giving that clear career progression in the way that, for example, the medical profession already has.
The concept, as I understand it, and I passionately believe is needed, is to be a voice, particularly for classroom practitioners, not necessarily for leaders, for classroom practitioners. A really sort of strange consequence of being involved in the Carter Review is that I've now found myself in this Twitter world of lots and lots of teachers who followed me as a result of that. And it gives me a probably slightly warped, but nonetheless very powerful insight into a profession that is feeling incredibly done to. And if you're just a sort of main scale teacher and you're getting on, you're doing a really good job, you do feel like lots of people are bearing down on you, telling you what to do, and actually you might think that you've got better ideas than the people who are telling you. So it shouldn't really be me talking about College of Teaching, because I'm probably one of those people who do that. So the point of the College of Teaching is to have a voice for those people. We see quite a lot of grassroots movements really rapidly developing, Research Ed, Northern Rocks. There's a number of them which show that there is a real appetite at the chalk face for people to take control in the same way that we see leaders in the room today taking control. And I see the College of Teaching being to do that, to be a gatekeeper in terms of setting standards, but not necessarily to be kind of making judgments about individuals. I don't think that sits wrong.
See, I wouldn't disagree with any of that, but I do think in order to get its substance, it's got to be able to have teeth when it needs them.
The question, though, was, will it develop professionalism in the profession? I mean, we're talking about the view from the outside world in and how the public will view teachers, and it's important that they are registered and have status and the like. Will it improve professionalism, Frank, do you think? Or does that not matter? Or teachers are sufficiently professional and just need something to...
I think teachers are very professional. In my career, I've rarely come across people who aren't professional. They may not have the standards that are required, and they've occasionally gone wrong, and you've dealt with it, but the vast, vast majority have been very professional. I think it will make those professional standards right if it has the proper voice of the profession to do that and to publicly and frequently enunciate those to the wider world as well as to the profession itself.
And I think one of the things it can do is lay out what that profession means in terms of the career pathway, the kinds of standards, the kinds of things that you should be doing, the kinds of professional development you should be entitled to.
In a way the GTC didn't.
Absolutely. Well, no, the GTC didn't do that. The way the other professional organisations that you mentioned earlier do for their professions. So it's an expectation and it's an entitlement that I will continually be developed, and I will be getting high quality input to help me to do that.
Yeah.
Chancellor, what about a Royal College? What do you think, Len?
Sounds like a good idea to me.
That's what we get. Succinct, concise, and to the point. Do you think it simply being called the Royal College would be good for teachers? I mean, you know, my dad was a teacher, my mum was a teacher, I'm the nephew of 3 others. There was a time when if you were a teacher, you were respected. It may be anecdotal, but these days you are not. You tell a kid off in the classroom. In my day, my dad told me off. You tell a kid off in the classroom, these days the parents come and tell you off. That might be anecdotal. But if you give them Royal College status, will it be good for teachers?
That's why it sounds good to me. I'm not Chancellor in this role, just Andy. Sorry, I know we're getting mixed messages here because I spoke about being a Chancellor, but I wasn't invited here as a Chancellor, so I can't officially speak as a
something of who you are and what the experience you had will have led to you being in the position of Chancellor, will it not?
I'm sorry, it's a bit unfair to say.
Okay, Lemn Sissay, do you think that it's better to give teachers Royal College status?
That sounds like like a good idea if it's going to make a teacher feel both supported and part of something which has them in mind and that knows their processes and that can communicate to the press as well.
Yeah.
It sounds like a good idea,
Because it does give it clout, doesn't it? Royal College of Surgeons, Royal College of Physicians, Royal College of Midwives, Royal College of Teaching. Sounds good. So let's revote then, shall we? Same question applies. You have the first set of answers here. So once again, I believe the Royal College of Teaching will develop professionalism in the profession. Having heard what you heard from our panellists, I wonder whether anybody's views have changed. Again, A, strongly, B, partly, C, neither agree, nor D, disagree, and E, which had that 8% strongly disagree. We were sort of partly agree, as I recall from the first slide. So let's see if anybody has swayed dramatically on this, given the response from our panellists. And if you want to get a question from the floor, we will when we come back if we've got time. So partly agree more. The strongly disagrees has definitely gone down. So those who strongly disagreed have been swayed a little at least. So thank you for that. These answers will be available to you, I'm sure, via various websites and the like. Now, let's move on to accountability. That's a topic that's close to the hearts of most people in education. There is a range of levels of accountability, of course. Governing bodies, league tables, DFE, of course, local authorities, dear old Ofsted. School outcomes, it is fair to say, affect businesses and skills. It affects economic stability, employers, it affects local elections. It even goes so far as to affect house prices. Are governance arrangements then, panel, too ad hoc and fragmented to challenge the quality of education for all children in our care? Dr. Stevens, I'd like to start with you on that one.
I'd like to go back to something that Lem said this morning, actually, about stories and narrative. Because, yes, exactly as the question's framed, there are all those different layers of governance and accountability in the system. But actually, who brings the coherent story about a school and about what a school does to each of those different things? And I think this is about leadership. And the leadership of the school, just in the same example that Lem gave us this morning around Islington Arts College, which actually says, yeah, we're accountable to all of those things, but this is the story that we tell about Islington Arts College. This is the story that means something to the community that we serve, communities that we serve, to the young people that we serve, and it will also, if expressed sharply and appropriately evidenced in a professional way that the best schools do, it will also coherently fulfill the requirements also of each of those other things that we've described. It would be irresponsible of me to say, oh, well, of course, you know, SATs results, GCSE results, they don't matter. Of course they matter. Those tickets that young people get on that journey are absolutely necessary. But on their own, they're insufficient because they only equip you with the tickets for a much richer and diverse journey. So I think, where does the coherence come? Because I think potentially those different levels of governance could be fragmented. It comes from the leadership in the schools and multi-academy trusts.
A brilliant answer then. That's a terrific answer on coherence, but the question was... Is it too ad hoc and fragmented? I mean, I appreciate your point that in an ad hoc and fragmented system, a coherent leadership structure can exist within that. Yeah. But is it better to make it less ad hoc and less fragmented?
No, I think it's impossible to do that because we're accountable to so many different people. So if you take accountability for the long term of a school, for example, long term for some of the students in that school will be very different from long term from the way Ofsted or the government see it, for example. And you have to be diverse in the way that you express those accountabilities. You can call it ad hoc or you can call it appropriately differentiated. I'm sticking with the latter.
Ad hoc or appropriately differentiated, Frank?
I would go more for the appropriately differentiated today. It's certainly, governance is a great deal better and a great deal more discussed than it was 5 or 10 years ago. And I think the quality of governance is steadily increasing. And I do think it is becoming more coherent and in its approach. And it is becoming much more skills-based, which is what it needs to be, rather than representative-based. And I think that's what's really crucial. I think what we've not quite got right in the governance is, as we're building a multi-academy trust system, is I don't think we've got the integration of that governance with the bigger community, not just the local school community, but the bigger community that it serves in an area. And I think we have to do more in building that side of it.
Professor?
I may have a slightly more jaundiced view on this, possibly because we're overdue an Ofsted inspection. And I'm going to say a bit about Ofsted, because although I do believe that some good things have happened through Ofsted recently, it does feel to me, I seem to witness it as a disease throughout the system. And again, I'll go back to those people who follow me on Twitter, whose world I get a little insight into, whose workload does seem to have become almost unbearable. And often the reasons can be traced back one way or another to Ofsted, to do with the way their senior leadership team has interpreted what Ofsted is looking for in terms of marking, in terms of feedback, in terms of triple marking, things like that. It does seem to be creating a great big problem. I was speaking at an event yesterday about teacher recruitment and retention, and we all had our grand ideas about professional development and this, that and the other. And one very emotional young lady stood up at the end in tears. She had just left the teaching profession. And she said, none of you have said anything about, the elephant in the room is the fact that we've got this unsustainable workload. And it's because of this shadow of Ofsted that hovers over us. That I'm not saying it's necessarily Ofsted itself, it's possibly the way Ofsted feels by those who are on the receiving end of it and those who have responsibility for the leadership. But it seems to me that it is quite broken and it does need to be fixed somehow. I'm afraid I haven't got the answer, though.
No, well, perhaps we can come to that conclusion on another debate, but you would agree accountability is important, and
Yes.
Absolutely. Although
things
it's
have to be overseen, don't they? You have to make sure.
I was
that,
in Ontario in the spring. We went to have a look at their education system, which seems to be performing particularly highly on a number of measures. And their lack of anything like Ofsted was absolutely the thing that was sort of most evident. They are accountable to parents. Parents have a much, much stronger voice in Ontario, and I don't know how they achieve that. I know it wouldn't necessarily be easy to replicate that in all sort of regions in this country, but the accountability comes through the parents, and the teachers are trusted to do a good job. The default position is to assume the job will be done well, and it's in exceptional circumstances that it isn't.
A default positive assumption.
Yeah.
It's not very British, is it? Lemn?
I can't answer the question. It's been you've got the...
You may have some thoughts then, Lem, on the next one, which is very straightforward. Does every school need its own head teacher? Now, we've already heard this afternoon that 80% of what happens in a school is directly accountable to the head teacher. Therefore, Frank, presumably they all need their own, do they?
It depends on who the head teacher is. As we build the new system, the role of a head teacher is changing. The single institution which has the head, it definitely needs a head teacher. When the school is within a trust, it needs a lead teacher who may be called a head teacher but may not necessarily have those same responsibilities, because parents do need to see who is in charge in this organisation on a day-to-day basis, and they need that person. They don't necessarily have to have all the burdens that the individual head teacher does when they're on their own. So I do think there is a role for that, for a leader of each distinct organisation, whether it's part of a whole trust or whether it's an individual one.
So a kind of site manager, if you will, but not necessarily a head teacher. Dr. Stevens, at
Chief
what level
operating
currently?
officer.
This is my point. Sometimes I put my parent head on and I say, okay, who is running my child's school?
Yeah.
Is there a head in my child's school, Dr. Stevens? And if not, how can my child's school be best run without a head?
This provides an opportunity to have somebody who has got a different role than the classic head role, still to be called a head. If a head is what is needed, then the criteria of what they do may change. But having a head is got to be a good thing.
Yeah.
They say that a fish rots from the head down regarding organisation. So let the head be the head. Let them have a personality and let that personality fit with their aims and goals and spread throughout the school, through the parents and through the community.
But they have an executive principle above them.
Yeah,
then.
whatever they have,
Yeah.
whatever they have, they can. I think it was already intimated. The head is the go-to person. Let them breathe. In fact, if they have less to do in terms of the job description, it gives them more chance for their personality to breathe through their aims. I love a school, where you look at the head and you think, God, she's amazing.
Yeah, so do I.
I met her once and she was just...
And you remember her?
You married her.
Well, she's a deputy, yeah.
The point
I'm not sure Mrs. Meredith would be terribly thrilled to hear that, I have to tell you, Len.
But the opportunity for that inspirational figure, which is what they are, to shine, has got to be a great thing.
So that's the thing, Dr. Stevens, is that they don't have to be a head as we understand them today, just an inspirational figure.
Well, Sorry.
Go on, let John chip in on this.
I think what every school needs is great leadership.
Yes.
It doesn't necessarily need in fact, I think it's dangerous for everything to be invested in one single person. And in fact, the best leadership that I see across schools is that which precisely is expressed at every part of that school. So when you talk to the young people, when you talk to new teachers going in there, when you talk to the people who clean, when you talk to the people who manage the site, they all have that shared vision. They're part of that team. So it's great leadership throughout. Now,
But the book has to stop somewhere.
I was just going to say, where that then takes you is, and I agree from a parent's point of view, if your child's lost their swimming kit or whatever, you want to know who you go to. Now, actually, making everybody feel responsible for part of that school, so genuinely, to use the jargon, distributed leadership, if you can build that trust with lots of people within the school, that's even better, but you still need to know who's the go-to person if things get really sticky. And so we've got to be great at communicating, particularly new and unfamiliar forms of leadership to parents and the community, because we've got a great attachment in this country to one school, one head teacher, the personality of the head teacher, their role in the community. And I think if we're going to change that, we need to do it incrementally, and we need to do it with communities so they understand what's happening, so that precisely parents have the go-to place that they can approach if needed.
Because as Frank told us, 80% of what happens in a school is directly attributable to the head teacher. That's why we have that system and that's why it works.
But you know
Professor, do they have to have an educational background? If you put somebody in charge of the school, do they have to have come up through the system like most heads?
I think in that mix of leadership that's just been referred to, you do need some with an educational background, but you probably also would be well served by having some who haven't, and particularly in the kind of CEO of the multi-academy chain role. Some of the best ones I've seen have been people who have at least had some time in other sectors, ideally some time in education as well. This issue between being an autonomous head and being a principal who is line managed by a CEO is one that interests me. I think there's a really careful balance that needs to be had between having sufficient autonomy that you do feel like you can lead your organisation and you can stand with credibility in front of those parents who look to you to do that. But at the same time, if you're part of an academy chain, then there is a level of governance above that as well. And I think it's quite a skill for that CEO role to get that right, to have enough trust in the individuals in the schools, but also enough of a superstructure that there is some kind of consistency, oversight. And I don't think it's a job I could do.
There are more questions I could have, but I'm aware of the time, and I do want to move on, which is another of your keypad questions, ladies and gents. Opportunities for academisation, that's it. Providing for outstanding and flexible leadership. Oh, sorry, have I missed one? I feel confident in my role, developing character and resilience in children and young people. So we're talking about the opportunities that are provided by academisation for outstanding and flexible leadership. Does your role in developing character and resilience in young people, are you confident currently? A, agree, B, agree, strongly, then agree, somewhat. You can read it, I don't have to read it out, you're all very bright people. A few seconds left. Confidence in your role developing character and resilience in children and young people. Let's have a look-see. Strongly agree, good. Agree, 44, that's equally good. And then it sort of tails away, somewhat agree. So the neutrals disagree and strongly disagree are fading away. So it would appear in the room, at least, people are confident in the role that they have developing character and resilience. Lemn, we haven't heard from you for a while, and we talked about this earlier this morning about the role that a teacher has outside pure academia. Schools be responsible for developing character and resilience. We touched on this morning. Remind us of your thoughts for those who weren't here.
Yeah, I'm just actually thinking about the difference between academia and sort of and this character growing and resilience growing in children, and thinking that the two are not necessarily that separate, and that actually one feeds into the other. The more you develop the character of somebody, teaching is about developing the character of a child to the point that they want to do what you want them to do, and they take you to places that you were not predicting necessarily. And I don't know whether I don't know. Can young people really be machine taught?
No.
Does that really happen? Or do they develop character and resilience while attaining things? You know,
Well, do the one go hand in-
is it so
does
separate?
resilience come from strong character?
Yes, I would believe it does. Yeah.
So does the environment in a school develop character within children, and is it beholden upon teachers to be part of that?
Yes to all of those things. What I'm saying is that you can both be academic and have your character and resilience developed. And in fact, to be attaining your goals is also a way of being able to develop your character and resilience. There are people who slip through that net, and they're the ones we need to catch. But
Dr. Stevens, you were nodding vigorously there. Schools should be responsible for character development, do you think? Because most people in the room clearly feel confident they have the skills, but is it a responsibility they should necessarily have to have?
I'm not a bit surprised to see the results of that survey. It chimes exactly with what I would say. A question I sometimes ask school leaders is, where does leadership development start in your school? With whom? And sometimes people say, oh, when new teachers come in, all the rest of it. What most people say is it starts with the young people. Leadership development starts with them, and I often say, if you want to see leadership of young people at its best, go to a nursery class. There's lots of leaders there. Some of them are adults. Most of them aren't. But actually fostering and developing that leadership, the kind of leadership I saw this morning as I approached this building, and we had the young people from Harrop standing there waiting on us with chocolates, greeting us warmly, looking at us in the eye, and then standing on this stage as a choir, capturing all our imaginations, leading this room, those sorts of activities, and giving young people those rich activities in school, to have the risk, to take the risk of standing on this stage. And it isn't easy at that age, and to perform confidently. That's how we develop the resilience. They feel that risk, they feel the fear, and they do it anyway, because schools like Harrop and others, like most represented here today clearly, enable young people to take those risks safely, and in so doing develop resilience, because they see that actually sometimes things might go wrong, but you can repair it. It's not a world where everything goes swimmingly, but when they go wrong, you can repair, and there are people there called teachers and others that work with you who will pick you up again afterwards. And that, I'm really pleased and encouraged to see that, because that's my view of the world too.
So we seem to be saying, Frank, that whether it's the responsibility or not, it will just, in a good school, outstanding school, happen by default, will it not?
I don't think it happens by default. It happens because of the quality of the teaching.
Yeah, but that's my point. It doesn't say this is not one of the aims of our school. It's not something we're trying to achieve. It just happens in a good environment.
You don't need a subject called resilience or character, but you structure what you do, and in terms of what you do with children to ensure that they are challenged. You do push them hard. You ensure that they do fail from time to time, because actually it's only by failing that you learn to stand up and get stronger. So you have to organise the way you manage your classroom and the things you do outside the classroom. And as I've said in my own talk, and I've been a passionate believer in things like Duke of Edinburgh's Award, expeditions for all aspects of it. And I used to run that all over not quite all over the country, but mostly in the southwest and the Midlands area. But it really is vital to do that, because actually when you're educating a child, there are three things that have to be educated. There's the academic side, there's the physical side, and there's the spiritual, the thing that defines John as John, or as Archbishop Gutierrez said, the Jonian quality of John you've got to get out as well, and you've got to develop all those things to get it right. And it's what you do and the way you do things. Parents do it at home, but schools also do it with the quality of the education they provide.
Professor, it isn't then a responsibility necessarily. We don't need a lesson called it, and it happened automatically. Can a school be good or outstanding without this kind of thing happening, do you think?
I don't think so, but I think there is a strange discourse that I've got myself sucked into occasionally. And I actually found myself speaking to an event in London a few months ago where the title was Knowledge versus Character. So it was presented as a polarised thing. Either we teach pupils stuff or we develop their character. We can't do the two together, which is exactly what the panel have been saying. can be done and should be done. I mean, teaching is all about the development of reason and rational thought and an understanding of decisions and choices and what happens and consequences. And for me, that's all about developing resilience and character. But it's a strange thing, and I don't quite understand where it's coming from, this polarisation that, you know, we have a choice to make. Either we can teach them stuff that they need to know, or we can develop their character. And to me, it's just blatantly obvious you do the two together.
I'm not sure where the polarisation is coming from.
No.
League tables, I suspect.
I don't know.
Just a view. Keypad question then. I suspect your views won't have changed massively, but I think we're going to ask you the same question again, having heard what you've heard. Whether you are confident in your role, whether it should be the responsibility or not was the discussion. But are we going to redo this one? Yes, we are. Questions repeated. There you are. Look, I suspect we'll end up pretty similarly where we were, given your confidence is unlikely to have changed in the last 5 or 10 minutes or so. However, mine is just to go through what I'm asked to do. So, confidence in your role. Let's hope it's still strongly agree, and let's hope these children are developing tremendous characters and resilience and are strong, yes, fully rounded individuals as they pass through the education system, which is terrific. Which brings me neatly on to question 6, which has been provided via Twitter and social media. And I thank you for them, by the way. They are very interesting. The benefit of an opinion is that no evidence is required, clearly. Many people express strong opinions about teachers. Oh, don't they just? And children's behaviour and how it should be managed. They also have opinions on why people leave the profession. How, then, can we ensure that the most authentic evidence is gathered? Because the benefit of an opinion is that no evidence is required. We need evidence here. How can you ensure, panel, that most authentic evidence is gathered so the best possible recommendations and plans are put into place? I understand that to mean, therefore, about children's behaviour and management and why people leave. Professor, this is your area of expertise, I think. How do we get proper facts and proper research rather than columnists in newspapers having a pop?
Well, this is my shameless opportunity for a plug. I'm going to focus this question on the remit that I mentioned, the work I'm currently involved in, which is actually producing sort of best practice guidance and recommendations in terms of the initial teacher education for behaviour management. So I'm going to focus it specifically on that. The remit of the group is to come up with, by Easter, some guidance, some recommendations on best practice in how we prepare the future teaching workforce to be able to manage behaviour effectively, because we know that's one of the key reasons why people drop out, either in the initial or later on, once they've been in the job for a few years. So the remit of the group is to gather evidence, and that's one of the reasons why there's an invitation, I'm sorry, it's fairly short notice, to stay behind at 4 o'clock if you're able to. If you've got experience, if you are an expert in developing behaviour in initial teacher education with students, whether it's in school or elsewhere, and you've got things that you want to submit to the inquiry, here's an opportunity to do it. We've got a model from the Carter Review, which I think worked really well, in that we had a really good balance of lots of conversations with people actually doing the job, i.e. people like you, who know what works and what doesn't work. And we had lots and lots of those. We went and visited lots of providers as well. Plus, we looked at research, we looked at international evidence, and then we came to just some basically expert panel judgments about which ones we would put the emphasis on. And that will be the process for this remit, because I believe it worked well. I think we came up with some sensible recommendations that people are taking seriously, and it came from that rich, sort of broad and deep type of evidence from a wide variety of sources.
John, in gathering of the best and most authentic evidence, is it simply a case of asking those at the sharp end, do you think?
One of the things that I hoped, going back to the Royal College of Teaching, one of the things I hope the Royal College of Teaching will bring is a greater emphasis on the responsibility of the profession, just like the medical profession, to engage more in research. So one of the remits of teaching school alliances is that they engage in research and development. And up and down the country, in partnership with research professionals in universities, we've seen some fantastic progress in this. However, if you were to ask me honestly, I still think that the profession is often at the whim of opinion, of every wind that blows, of sometimes fairly flaky research, which results in quite big consequences, because too rarely have we properly and professionally, as a profession, engaged in any kind of large-scale research. So some of the work that we've been doing recently using randomized control trial methodology, which isn't common in the education field, or certainly wasn't, it's become increasingly common, so it involves skilling up thousands of teachers to do this, is around interventions in pupil premium and what works. That's been done jointly with CFBT, universities of Oxford and Durham and others, and a whole load of teachers really getting engaged. I hope that the Royal College of Teaching will bring more of that, because I agree with the premise of the question that too often we are the recipients of whichever wind that blows, opinion, or sometimes even research that suggests one way or another. And we need a coherent voice that helps us to speak back with confidence and evidence.
Frank and Lemn, if you have anything to add, please do. Otherwise, I'll crack on, because as you will have been aware, we've a couple more questions to get through.
I totally agree with that point
Thank
of
you.
view.
Okay, let's go to our keypads again, because we're talking about academy sponsorship, and we would like to know from you whether you think there is a role for the private sector / businesses in academy sponsorship. The options are fairly clear there. Yes, important, some, small, or no. Within the academy sponsorship world, is there a role for the private sector and or businesses? I wonder what we think about this one. This will be interesting. Okay, small role wins out. Some and none. Yes, an important role is way down at 17. Does that surprise you, Lem? Or do you think that people don't want private sector having too much of an influence, perhaps, in the role of the academy?
Well, it's not really got. I'm trying to think about what I think about that. What I think is that there's no problem with sponsorship. I have absolutely no problem with sponsorship. I do have a problem when sponsorship starts to change the aims of any organisation that it supports. So if
perhaps you should have defined the role, yes.
If it's supporting, I'm sorry, I'm not commenting on that, but if it's supporting what it is that you're doing, the direction that you go in, then why not? If it's trying to make if it's trying to change your core aims, then it's not a good idea at all. Change for the worse, that is.
But does the range and type of sponsor then, here's my other question, does the range and type of sponsor in education sector help to improve schools? Frank, we haven't heard from you for a while. The range of sponsors, is that key?
Yes, I think it's very good to have a range of sponsors in education. I think the evidence of the sponsored academies improvement over the last 15 years since the Blair government introduced them has shown a very significant improvement in a lot of outcomes for young people, because of some of the approaches, as well as the personal interest and enthusiasm of individuals who, from their business, who want to get involved, but they don't want to change the educational process.
Is there any evidence that one performs better than another? An individual philanthropist, a religious group, a business? Does it matter? Because we're talking about range. A school can only have one sponsor.
Yes, it can. Yes, but I don't think there is any evidence as yet that's been collected that shows one type is better than another. I think the personal commitment and the quality of the leadership of the individual, whether it's from an organisation or it's a philanthropist, entrepreneur, that's what's most important. Again, it comes down to the leadership of that individual, always.
Professor, I don't know whether there's any research on this or whether you and your academic world
sure there is,
have
but
looked on
it's not my area. I suppose I'll twist it to something that I do know a bit more about, which is the importance of having a really good mix of expertise in an alliance. Again, we've seen a lot of evidence of that today, and we saw it through Carter, that the best alliance, teaching school alliances or multi-academy trusts, know where their experts are in behaviour, in special needs, in assessment, whatever, and really utilise that across the group of schools. And that's one of the exciting things about the school-led system, is that that expertise is known about and being much more systematically shared, whereas I think it used to be more locked away.
Businesses should play some role or a small role, John. Has that outcome, because we talked about the range, again, has that response surprised you? Look at 30%.
For me, and it kind of builds on what others have said, it isn't so much the role that's played, it's what you do with that expertise. So, to give you a very live example, there's a free school alternative provision, so pupil referral unit in Nottingham, the Stone Soup Academy. And what they have done there is bring the discipline of a business model, but keep the absolute educational expertise. Yep. And what the discipline of the business model does is free the creativity of the educational expertise to work with these young people who haven't coped in mainstream school. And then that business discipline gives those young people a route beyond school as well. So there's an example of where you've taken quite a big role in terms of the business sponsor, but used it in highly appropriate ways that remain focused on the best possible outcomes for children and young people. And I think when you do that, you would want that sponsorship to be a very prominent and deep role, when in fact your interest in the academy is, well, I'm going to provide some funding for others to take the lead. I think that probably should be a smaller role. But so defining precisely what you want from the sponsorship is the key thing for me. And if your definition is very, very focused on the outcomes for the young people, the role probably needs to be greater than it would be otherwise.
Which leads me neatly on to ask you the same question again. Given what you've just heard, I wonder whether any views have changed. We'll ask this one again. Depending on your view for the outcome of children, whether you think they have extra things to bring to the school, to the education system. Same question. It will be interesting to see whether C remains at the top or whether some people have vacated C and moved to A or B. The private sector or businesses in academy sponsorship, given what you've just heard, is there a role? Oh, look at that. I think there's definitely a shift there from, if memory serves, from C to B. So the small role has reduced a little and some role has increased. Ladies and gentlemen, I would love to have gone to the floor for questions, but I'm looking at my clock down here and my members of the team are tapping at their watches standing at the back of the room. So unfortunately, we must at that point draw things to a conclusion. Please thank your panel, Dr. Stevens, Frank Green, Lemn Sissay, Professor Sam. Thank you very much indeed.